I think of generative AI as a tool, but many people think of it as a replacement to people, right? And the whole
Hmm.
conversation about jobs going away, there my take is more like, yeah, when you got a tractor, yeah, you did not need the ox and the plow anymore, but you found something else to utilize your time for, which was even more creative and even more
Right.
productive. So I just feel the kind of roles and kind of jobs will change, but you'll always have enough things to do. All you need to do is maybe the pace at which these are changing and the pace at which you need to upskill or change your skills to adapt to a different thing. During that intermediate phase, I think you will see those challenges. But I do believe in the resilience of human society, which might be a different.
Hi, friends, and welcome to this exciting episode of Leading with Data. Today, I have with me Goda Ramkumar, who is currently VP of Data Science at Swiggy. She's not only a alumni of IIT Madras, but she has multiple publications to her name. Some of the writings on Medium she has done are very interesting. She was also a AI leader in the category, and she was winner of AI Leader Award at Data Hack Summit. And I feel there is so much to learn from Goda's experience and the problem she has solved. So looking forward to that. Goda, thanks for taking time out from your schedule, and I know this can be a very crazy week for you. So thanks for taking time out, and welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Kunal, and thanks for the kind words.
Great. So, Goda, I would want to start the discussion with your entry into analytics, data science, and I know you wanted to be an actress at some point, but that changed. So, can you tell how you got into analytics and data science, and then what was the story behind where you ended up being?
So when I was studying in IIT Madras, of course, that actress is a different story. I think that gene is still active.
Okay.
Uh, but
Hmm.
professionally speaking, when I was in IIT Madras, I was majoring actually in biotechnology, which was a very
Okay.
happening field when I was graduating.
Hmm.
But it did involve working a lot in the lab with all kinds of microorganisms. And me being the clumsy person I am, I was failing at it badly. And that's when I think operations research as a subject, which was my minor stream, kind of caught my attention. And I kind of felt that's where I would like to build my career in, because at that point, I don't think data science was a term. It came in much
Hmm.
later. It was all math, stats, optimization, and traditional methods, like we call them now. So I
Hmm.
decided I want to work in that area. And on campus, I took up a job with Sabre, which was at that point only company which was hiring in operations research field in the campus
Interesting.
placement.
Hmm.
So I'm grateful I kind of got through there, and gradually that transformed into data science without us knowing or realizing it with time, because you started off with traditional time series forecasting and non-linear optimization, and 8 or 9 years down the line we were building machine learning models, right? So it was kind of very
Right.
smooth transition into data science, I would say. But after that, I've
Hmm.
stayed in data science over like multiple companies I've been through, and it has been a very rewarding journey.
Interesting. And did you kind of start learning about operations research while you were in college, or this was a stream you wanted to be in and you were looking for roles in this with whatever mathematics you had studied
So
at that time?
while I was in college, it was one of the minor subjects being offered. It was offered by Management Studies
Interesting.
Department at Working Address that time.
Hmm.
Uh, so I took up that as an elective to start with, and I got so interested in that there were three more electives in the same field that was being presented, and I ran out of my credits. So I took extra credits, paid extra, and finished the fourth course
Wow.
as well. It was like
Interesting.
overall
Hmm.
four courses in the minor stream that I
Hmm.
got introduced.
Interest, interesting. And when it came to, let's say, finding your first job and with Sabre, were there specific areas or problems which were identified and then you were working on, or at that time it was still very open?
So Sabre was into like airline domain, right?
Right,
And I think airlines is an industry which has probably applied a lot of these techniques, back from 70s itself, right?
correct. Hmm. Yeah.
So I was working mainly in the pricing and revenue management area for airlines. So Sabre had a product,
Hmm.
and my team was responsible for the forecasting, optimization, inventory control, all of these algorithms behind that. So
Right.
initially, it
Hmm.
was a lot of working with airline clients in this region, visiting different
Hmm.
airlines, understanding the business problems, which I think is very important for a data scientist, because you should always walk backwards from end users,
Yeah.
go.
Hmm.
So initial years were getting exposed to that, and later I got into a role where you're building the next generation algorithms. But most of them were in the pricing and revenue management area.
Interesting. And then what tools were you using at this time? Was it actually C, C++, and then building the algorithms at the back end, or were there other tools you were
I stayed in Sabre for 10 years, and during the 10 years, at least the tools that we were using evolved from SAS to R to Python, right? And
using? Okay.
from like we also had a simulator where we had to simulate the airline operations that was built in C++. But after a point, it became so difficult to find talent of C++ and SAS that people migrated towards Python and Java more.
That is so true. That is so true. And for you personally, because 10 years is a significant time. So what was the transition for you during this period? So how did your career shape up while you were spending this time?
Yeah. I think every 2, 3 years I used to reach that point of thinking, should I do something else or should I do something
Right.
different, right? And
Hmm.
it so happened that every 2, 3 years something changed in my role that made it more interesting or more challenging, and I stayed back. For example, I
Hmm.
think after the first 3 years, like I said, I moved into a role which was more into building the next generation algorithms from handling clients, for example, right? So that seemed
Hmm.
interesting. The next transition, I transitioned into a people management role. So that looked challenging and interesting. In the
Yeah.
last
Hmm.
3 years, it was more about we thought of almost rewriting the product itself, because the product was like 20 years old, and we said now, with all being taken by low cost carriers, it needs a new thinking of the product. So I was
Hmm.
leading the rewrite of the revenue management product itself, right? So that was again a challenging role to lead out of India when majority of the company is in Dallas, right? So something or the other changed every 2, 3 years. But I
Hmm.
think when I hit the 10-year mark, it was like I should not get into comfort zone. And from a big company, I shifted to startup. And it was
Hmm.
almost like from air transportation, I crash landed to ground transportation at Ola. And it was like literal crash to the other extreme.
Wow. Interesting. And this was also the same time where so I was probably in similar stage. I joined Capital One in 2006, and there were these points where I would question what's the next step for me in the career, because the path of an analyst or a data scientist was never defined in that sense, right? In those days, you would either go into either a strategy role, or you would go into taking up a IT role. So were there points where you kind of questioned, and then what made you stay during that period?
I think for me, always being able to solve the problem and be closer
Mhm.
to that problem is very important. And I realized that in different ways at different parts of the journey. See, mostly when you're like all the domains I've worked on, if I see like whether it's airlines or cabs or food delivery now, I'm able to see the impact as a customer as well,
Hmm.
right? So that is one key aspect I think I was missing probably in my earlier part. If I look at uh, when I was working on biotechnology problems and drug discovery and all that,
Right.
it is it's a game of patience where you might see the impact of what you're doing 15 years down the line, right? Whereas here you
Right.
see impact day in and day out of your work. So that keeps me
Hmm.
going, and I don't differentiate it too much saying, am I working on a ML methodology or a deep learning methodology or an optimization? I feel data scientist's job is to make data useful for the organization in whatever way possible. So be a little tool agnostic, but problem centric is the way I
Hmm.
look at it. So that has always
Interesting.
kept me going, whatever these questions come up in mind.
Interesting. And then as you mentioned, you crash landed at Ola. So can you elaborate a bit more on that? What was the change? What was the culture like? And then what was the transition like for you?
Overall, I think it was almost like you have time dilation. This was like time shrinking, because
Yeah.
just to give an example, in an airline, from the time you put on the flight on schedule, you have 300 days to solve the problem, right? Whereas
Right.
here you have 300 milliseconds. You don't even have 300 milliseconds to solve the problem, right?
Correct.
So the whole introduction to big data and a lot of parallel processing you need to do with data, and a fast-paced culture in terms of you have to keep rolling out and learning from experiments and keep iterating. Almost every week you're launching something new. So that whole experience, I would say I learned more in those 2 years, probably what I had not learned in the previous 4 5 years, right? So that was definitely a
Mhm.
crash landing worth it. I met a bunch
Interesting.
of very talented folks,
Hmm.
and I think that also brings the network of talented individuals you get connected to, and then you learn from them, and that's just an exponential process, I feel. So all that happened very
Right. And this was also a unique challenge in the sense that there was no other company like Ola in India at that time. So you couldn't really hire talent from another company who would have solved similar problem, right? So how did you tackle that? And then I'm sure there would be stories or instances where you would have made an error and then realized some other way. So any anecdote to which you can share?
See, I think pretty much every problem we took, right? It felt like you're the first one trying to solve it, because typically when
Right.
you go back to literature or blogs and try to figure out who else has solved uh, it and how, it usually used to be transfer learning from some other domain. You try to transfer learn and say how to apply it to mobility domain, right? Maybe Uber had
Correct.
done some work, but beyond that, there was hardly anything. Just by looking, you couldn't find a solution, which means
Hmm.
every individual has to come up with their own solves. Sometimes these solves used
Right.
to be very quick, witty, and hacky, and they used to work.
Yeah.
Sometimes all those would have been put already, and now to get the last mile of the impact, you have to put more rigorous and sophisticated solves, and um, used to do that, experiment and learn from it and keep iterating. So both kinds of mix of problem statements were there. Just as an anecdote example, if I have to give, of course, we were working on Ola share problems, like where you have a shared
Hmm.
ride along with another passenger. And we were trying to come up with the best, way to match it and be able to predict that this ride might get shared and things like that. When we were doing that, when we simulated and saw our algorithm gave, fabulous results. But when you went live, we were not able to observe the same thing. And
Hmm.
we had a war room for like 15 days, and we were trying to figure out what went wrong. One
Hmm.
lesson that I took away from that whole thing is, when you're building as a data scientist, it's not enough to just think about the problem and the solution, but think about other aspects like what is being shown on the app. how is the UX of the
Hmm.
whole experience. Just to give you an
Right.
example, let's say I am trying to aggregate the requests that are coming so that I can match them the best way. But while I'm aggregating, what
Hmm.
are you showing to the user? Are you just showing a buffering icon, or are you showing, we are looking for the best match for you? Please wait for this. Might take a couple of
Right.
seconds. Just the messaging around would prevent a lot of
Hmm.
customers from just dropping off thinking, "Oh, my app has it's not working probably," right? So any algorithmic benefit
Interesting.
you bring will get nullified if this happens, right? So a lot
Yeah.
of small insights like this come in the rarest of situations.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, that's true because a lot of these, consumer behavior and design ends up
Correct.
influencing the work which is doing in the background. And among all the problems which you worked at Ola, which one did you think was the toughest one to crack, and something which was inherently a very difficult problem?
I think most problems were tough, like I said, because there was no prior
Hmm.
reference, right?
Right.
Quoting one would be unfair, but I'm just thinking. There was one very
Sure.
interesting problem, though, which was not exactly an interesting business problem, but an interesting engineering solve that we came up with. Because if you think of like the same matching thing I was saying, if you think of all
Hmm.
the requests that are there and all combinations possible, it's a highly kind of NP hard kind of a problem.
Right.
And if you have to really solve it in 30 seconds or some milliseconds, you have to give a response. We came up with a good parallelized approach to identify best matches,
Hmm.
and the way we uh, like I said, transfer learning is we kind of adapted it from something that was done in NLP to find overlapping meanings of words. We took a similar algorithm and put
Interesting.
it matching requests based
Hmm.
on their distance overlap, which I felt was very innovative. It was challenging was the scale part, and I think that out of box solution, really loved doing that.
Right. Interesting. And during this time, I'm presuming you would have also played a key role in shaping up the team, finding the talent. So what were some of the, learnings or things which you adopted at this time? Because again, uh, at least in my mind, when I talk to people, companies like Ola, etc., very exciting, but at the same time, difficult to kind of find those opportunities. What was your talent strategy like? How were you hiring people at that time?
So I think across companies with my hiring experience, one thing that matters a lot is the kind of brand value your company comes with, because then
Mhm.
um, there is a pull in the market, right? So
Right. Yeah.
then you can actually do selection, right? If you don't have enough pull,
True.
then you are not selecting. The market is selecting you in some way, right? So I think building a
Mhm.
good brand as a company that is focused on tech, that's does good things in like solves challenging problems in ML. I feel that's a big lever. It's a
Mhm.
very hidden lever. Not many people realize as to what kind of an image you have in the market as a tech company. I feel that plays a big role in terms of just the top of the funnel, getting
Sure.
good
Mhm.
folks, right? Beyond that, I feel in terms of really selecting the right people, I feel some skills are coachable. So if you have the basics of being able to think about a problem and the sharpness to solve it, and if you have fundamentals like your coding is right, you have first principle thinking, I feel all other skills can be taught, right?
Okay.
So these
Mhm.
are some of the spikes I look for while hiring. And of course, most importantly, the attitude, because all other things can be
Mhm.
learned if you're open to feedback and open to learn. Right.
Interesting.
So
So,
these three things are there, you're, I feel good.
mhm. And then do you also count the number of spikes like what typically consulting companies do that you would want to have three spikes in the career or something along those
Not
lines?
exactly. I think when you're looking for these three things at the end of, you know, I also believe a lot in doing and hire. Like, for example, if you give a case study or if you give a handout where somebody actually solves the problem and comes back to you with explanation, that's a better thing than judging someone in a half an hour conversation, right? So I
Sure.
feel that gives, because when you actually come and you're on the job, you have all the references possible for you to solve the problem. You don't have to solve a puzzle
Correct.
in 30 seconds to be good at your role. So I always believe in looking at the work done. For example, a lot of people maintain good, GitHub repos of the work they have done, right? And you
Hmm.
also we give, like, you can give take home case studies, assignments, and they can come back with a solution. So those things have helped weed out, false positives in some way.
Okay. Hmm.
Uh, but
Yeah.
after all this, when you talk to the person, at the end of the day, there is a gut feel. So that always triumphs.
Sure. Very interesting. And after spending this time at Ola, you decided to move to X to 10X, which is a very different company, a very different problem which they were solving, and these would have been very early days for them as well. So what was the thought? What was the how? What were you kind of looking for in the role at X to 10X?
So the X to 10X was actually started, one of the founders of X to 10X was with Ola before that, right? So I was
Okay.
working with him.
Hmm.
So it
Hmm.
was kind of a very organic transition into X to 10X because
Okay.
when
Hmm.
Saiki, the founder of X to 10X, when he was starting, I mean, I loved working with him at Ola. So it was like a natural organic transition to kind of join him. I think
Sure.
I was
Hmm.
the fourth employee or something at Extratenix, right?
Hmm.
So it was not only because I knew him, but also I felt the role at Extratenix was giving a lot of breadth into different domains and different
Yeah.
startups in the ecosystem. It's almost impossible to get that kind of breadth and have that overview of how to apply data science across. Right? It was a good
Hmm. Hmm.
opportunity from that perspective. Before that, I was only in transportation that way, right? Air and ground.
Right.
And so
Right.
now with
Right.
Expert NX, I got exposed to multiple domains, right? From gold loans to insurance to packaging to you name it, and there
Wow.
was a
Hmm.
startup trying to do something in that domain. So
Hmm.
that way, the breadth was very rich. And second, I think I learned, which I feel is a very important skill in your career, is to understand people well, right?
Hmm.
So because I was dealing with different kinds of founders, leaders in the startup ecosystem, um, understanding the other person's perspective, knowing how to influence, how to put across your point. So I learned a lot of these softer aspects, I would say,
Software
when I
skills.
was
Hmm.
at
Hmm.
um, though I
Interesting.
missed staying closer to the problem, which I told you drives me. I think
Yeah.
that's one of the
Hmm.
reasons I think that whole stint was short, and I wanted to go closer to the problem. So that's how. In fact, Swiggy was one of the companies I was interacting with at Extra 10x, and
Hmm.
again a natural transition because the problems
Imagine.
here were amazing.
Interesting. Okay. And, in fact, I was about to ask. So, in some sense, it is a trade-off between the breadth you cover and the depth you would probably want to go in each of these problems, right? So yes, there are a huge variety of problems, and then by natural distribution, each startup might be at a different level of maturity, not just in data science, but also the data they would collect, the kind of errors they might have. So inherently, it's a very difficult problem, right? That to try and help these startups in their data science journeys. Uh, so when you reflect back, what were like some of the key learnings you had in this period? And then let's say, there is a startup out there in a consumer segment, right? So a large B2C startup. Uh, Early stage, what would be some of the things which you would tell them that these could be some of the helpful things to keep in mind when you are starting or when you are in the middle of the journey?
So the majority of the blogs that I've written on Medium actually came out of that experience in how to make data
Mhm.
science work for an organization. Because there are a lot of
Mhm.
things that come just before the data itself, right? In terms of
Right.
how important data strategy is when you're building a business. See, data science can come much later, but data strategy is
Correct.
important right from day one, right? However big or
Mhm.
small you are as a startup, right? There will be problems you're solving once you scale. So, are you collecting or strategizing and collecting the right data? Are you building your product in a way where the data organically flows to you? Is a very strategic thing you should be aware of. That's the very first point,
Mhm.
right? Second is a lot of attention needs to be put into just getting the data organized well, in terms of it could be just in the nomenclature of how you're collecting the data, how you're organizing it into your data warehouses, how are you making it easier and democratizing, getting data, getting metrics for your organization, just to reach that very first stage of trackability, right? Even before you do
Mhm.
fancy stuff of science. The last stage is when actually, I think 60-70% of the problems can be solved without applying sophisticated science. But when you hit a certain scale, even a small delta means a lot, is when a lot of
Right.
MLAI come into picture. So that's the typical evolution, unless you are a AI centric company itself, where your product itself is an AI product. Okay? So that was my
Mhm.
major takeaway from that experience, which I tried to put across as different dimensions of making data science work as the blog series. Um,
Interesting.
so most of my work was also in strategizing the data, right? And as part of that, I came up with frameworks. Frameworks is what helps you scale across companies. What are those commonalities you can apply?
Mhm. Interesting. And you mentioned the transition to Swiggy also happened naturally. So can you elaborate on that? What happened there?
So this is when I think COVID had just hit in 2020,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
at that point, I think the primary focus for majority of the startups was to stay afloat and stay operational, right? Uh, and I had also started questioning, I'm not closer to the problem. I want to be closer to the problem. So it kind of overlapped well in terms of both the focus of startup shifting away from data science a bit to stay operational, and for me to look at an opportunity which was taking me closer to the problem.
Mhm. Interesting, interesting. And I'm presuming Swiggy would have seen a very different COVID than a lot of other organizations out there, right? So how has been this journey? What are the kind of problems you have, let's say, worked on? And then again, in Swiggy's context, what are some of the difficult problems you and your team are handling today?
Right. So I think I joined Swiggy when our orders had fallen because of COVID suddenly from the good growth phase we were seeing. So in a way, I've got to see that growth path again. Like post
Hmm.
COVID again coming back and bouncing back and somewhere and growing even higher than what you had seen before. So it was almost like you're seeing the scaling journey of a startup, right? Um, and during COVID, I used to feel very good joining Swiggy because I also felt it came as a savior, right? You could deliver stuff at home. We had also launched Instamart
Right.
at that time. So
Hmm.
everybody was using it. And I could say, my work is helping people get stuff at home during these tough periods.
Hmm.
So that was
Right.
very fulfilling aspect of it as well. In terms of challenging problems, I sometimes feel very grateful that within the same team, you're getting such a breadth of problems to apply different techniques. So you have an image problem, you have a natural language problem, you have structured data problem, you're doing optimization, you're doing reinforcement learning, all of these to find in the same team or same
Hmm.
organization to apply. It's a very rare occurrence, right? So from that
Right.
perspective, I feel it's like a data scientist heaven that way, that you get to apply all of this, learn from all of this, and all the problems are being solved at scale. You're solving it in real time. So if you as a customer open Swiggy app, right from the time you open and we say we are locating you to the time your order actually gets delivered, including you reaching out to customer care if something goes wrong, every
Hmm.
aspect or every step there has a bunch of data science modules that are powering them, right? So that shows
Correct.
how much data science is at the center of things at Swiggy, and we have a seat at the table. um, you are involved right from how the business goals are defined to business decisions are made, and how that needs to be powered by our data science, and hence you'll solve the problem with that context. It's not a waterfall approach where you just decide this is what we want data science to do, which is a lovely thing to have in an organization, right? So yeah,
Hmm.
that we're very grateful for that.
Interesting. And then what is the culture like in your current team? How do you, let's say, execute a project end to end? What would it typically, the life cycle of a project look like?
So we do follow an annual operating plan structure where every year, I think now is the period when we are doing that for the next year. So
Mhm.
every year you kind of set, your top level zero goals that you want to hit as a company, and you kind of figure out to achieve that what all needs to be done, right? And you come up with a product roadmap for that, and hence a data science roadmap as well, because you know what should be powering what. And we kind of
Mhm.
execute on that with quarterly milestones. So at the end of the quarter you kind of revisit to see if we need to change something or reprioritize anything. So that's the annual to quarter cycle in terms of how it all starts. But in terms of the ways of working, it's a very close knit, like a pod like of structure, where each stream has folks from product engineering, data science, analytics, design, all working together, that if you come into a room it's very difficult to say who's from which team, right? Because
Right.
you can see
Mhm.
data scientists wearing the product hat and thinking about this is how the product should be built, and you have product folks suggesting we should have built these kind of features into the model, and
Features into
then
the model.
engineering coming up with estimates on how the business numbers are going to change. That typically it's a very high ownership culture, which means it's about taking
Mhm.
charge and go beyond your role boundaries and execute kind of a culture. And
Mhm.
I support that a lot in terms of even the principles we have laid out for my team. One of the
Mhm.
principles is customer comes first, the end customer comes first, models are just tools, right? Solve the end customer's problem, so
Right.
you think end to end, in terms of that, but work as a team, go beyond boundaries. So some of these principles we
Mhm.
try to stick.
Interesting. And the models which you're building, do they see usually a lot of frequent releases? Do they see, do you kind of take that, break it down, release a completely new architecture over time? I mean, so is it more, how do you improve accuracy from X to the next level, or a lot of it is also rethinking about the underlying infrastructure?
Yeah, so definitely when we have a roadmap for pretty much the models that you have in production as well as newer ones you're going to launch, you have a goal on model metrics as well as to
Right.
where do you want to take it from and where do you want to take it to. So we do have
Mm-hmm.
releases. Typically, almost every month you're releasing something on the models,
Mm-hmm.
and every release also has its own, like you have an experiment cycle. You have to experiment and see the metrics and then scale it up, kind of a go to market
Mm-hmm.
strategy. That said, there are also models which have been there and may not need a lot of enhancements because they're doing well. But you do track, like in
Yeah.
terms of monitoring the models, like how are the metrics doing? Are there any drifts which might need, for example, retraining the model? So there is one level of operational excellence on models which don't need many enhancements, and for models that need continuous enhancements, it's like almost on a monthly basis you're releasing something or the other.
Okay, interesting. And you know, reflecting back, as you mentioned, that in the initial part of your career, there was a lot of looking at what's out there and then adopting it. Do you still need to do that at Swiggy, or that's this particular domain is a lot more evolved and has more literature compared to some of the previous ones?
No, see, in terms of literature, maybe over the last 4 5 years, you will find some papers in this domain.
Mm-hmm.
That too, which mostly other industries. We also publish a lot, in conferences, and we publish papers.
Right.
So some of the work is from Swiggy only, like that. With similar other companies across the globe, there are papers, blogs that you refer to. But that said, I still have the same feeling like I had in Ola, where you are solving a bunch of problems the first time, or it is problems specific to you. Sometimes it's even a problem specific to Indian market that you're solving, which nobody else has solved, even in the hyperlocal domain, right? But
Right.
in terms
Mm-hmm.
of solves as well, there are interesting things we have done here as well. There was a blog out there recently only, which is, for example, like on the spatial or the geolocation data, we kind of applied like something like a word to vec for us to understand the interactions and cluster the spatial or a city into parts for us to be able to break down a big problem into smaller chunks, right? That I felt
Mm-hmm.
was a very interesting idea, where you're applying something like word to vec to geospatial data and coming up with clusters to solve an optimization problem, right? So kind of came a full circle,
Wow.
right?
Right.
But a lot of new things, both in terms of like even with the recent Gen AI buzz and all, bunch of things we have done on text to SQL to be able to query natural language. A bunch of
Mm-hmm.
internal folk using it. Then on the image side, like I don't know if you have seen, for some of the restaurants we do have generated videos from
Yeah.
images. Bunch of problems in search. Now we are also a multi-category. So you have food, you have grocery, you have mall, and genie. So many business units. So how do you solve problems in a way that caters to all? And which are the problems that are
Mm-hmm.
specific to each of these businesses that you need to solve in a more bespoke manner? So that makes the mix very, very interesting.
Interesting. Very interesting. And so, coming to where I wanted to go next, generative AI, right? Last 1.5 years has been crazy to say the least in terms of the developments, applications, and the acceleration in the domain. And then, use case starting from replacing images on the, let's say, menu for restaurants to creating these videos. But stepping back, what are your thoughts on generative AI overall? And then how has been, generative AI for you personally?
Okay, this is my personal opinion. So I
Mm-hmm.
feel generative AI is also a tool, right? Now,
Mm-hmm.
the tool is as good as the user, I feel, at any point, right?
Right.
So, as
Mm-hmm.
long as the user in whose hands you have the tool is using it for the right use cases, it can do wonders and it can be very impactful, right? But just
Mm-hmm.
because if you have a tool, if you start hitting everything with that hammer, then it's not a
Right.
good ROI. Or if you hit
Mm-hmm.
irresponsibly, then it's a threat to the society, right? So that's my opinion on any tool. In terms of how it can impact in a good way, I feel a lot of productivity unlock can come from there. So I was just
Mm-hmm.
talking to one of my team members last week where we were saying, now when we are hiring, the real skill we need to hire for is, are you able to formulate a problem and in natural language step by step tell how, right?
Right.
Now
So the
somebody
true
else can
pseudo
write,
algorithms
yeah,
have to be
right?
tested. Right.
So I think the skills for which you will be valued more is will change, right? With this
Mm-hmm.
new development, you will be much more faster with all the co-pilots and all coming. I think it will make you faster and actually give you time to invest in the aspects where only you can do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, if you find the right set of business use cases, you can also generate good ROI from a
Mm-hmm.
business point of view as well. So overall, I'm positive about what has happened. It has made a lot of lives easier and interesting. Just that you have to use it in the right places and for right reasons.
Right. And has it changed your hiring strategy, or has it impacted how you're looking for talent as of now?
I'm still insisting on good coding skills because
Okay.
it's like coming from more first principles thinking. But maybe there'll be a day where you don't insist on it too much. But it hasn't changed, at least for me.
Okay.
But
Mm-hmm.
definitely, problem solving and being able to articulate the solution to a problem well is being indexed on more, because if you're able to do that, you can get the work, right? It's
Correct. Mhm. Interesting. And let's say for someone, you know, trying to get into AI, or generative AI or ML or data science, irrespective of what we call the field, uh, how should they think about, their career? And then, because, so would you uh, recommend that they should kind of start getting into AI and Gen AI as much as possible, or would you still say go back to fundamentals, learn the coding, ML models, deep learning models? So there is this dichotomy of where do you start, and then obviously the timelines can change, and then maybe in some sense it's also not a dichotomy because you can't really know the advanced stuff by not knowing the fundamentals. But I would love to hear your thoughts and your take on what should a, let's say, person getting into data science do, and how should they think about their career.
right. So I think getting into data science, the first point I would start with is the get into it for the right reason. By
Mm-hmm.
right reason, I'm referring to is, don't get into it because it is being hyped as the future, but get into it because
Mm-hmm.
you really enjoy solving the problems and you enjoy solving it with data, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Beyond that, I would still stress on the having the fundamentals and the first principles strong, because most of
Mm-hmm.
these tools will solve the happy path, right? By that, what I mean is, if everything is working fine, you don't need to go deep, problem gets solved. But when they don't,
Mm-hmm.
is when you'll have to go one
Mm-hmm.
or two layers behind it to see why it's not working, for which, anyways, you need
Right.
fundamentals and principles thinking. So I don't think anything can take you away from that. Because if
Mm-hmm.
every time it was happy path, none of us would be required, right? So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
definitely stress on having the fundamentals strong. By fundamentals, I mean math, I mean coding, any language, but at least know to code well in one language, because then transfer learning
Mm-hmm.
Gen AI will for you, but you
It's
should
easier.
know to do it well in one language. Uh, and being very focused on what the problem is, and asking, why am I solving this problem, or the so what of solving this problem.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've seen cases where you applied an ML model for the sake of it, because you want to apply an ML model, that problem did not need an ML model, right? So
Right.
asking, asking why this problem needs to be solved and is this the right way to solve the problem is a very important thing, right? These are the things you should focus on. the tools will
Hmm.
keep changing. At one point, it was SAS, R, then Python, now Gen AI in
Yeah.
future.
Mhm.
Tools will keep changing, but I think these three will stay almost the same.
And when you think about overall data science as a domain or AI as a domain, uh, how do you see it evolving? So do you see, let's say, use cases on traditional ML and some of the traditional techniques continue to grow and Gen AI kind of explodes the market further? Or you would say that over time, maybe more and more use cases would move to uh, generative AI or assisted solving. I wouldn't say so I guess one is where you would take the problem, go through algorithms, see which one is working yourself, and the other one is more assisted approach. So how do you see, let's say, next few years and then some of the trends in terms of how the domain would kind of evolve?
Right. So I feel that where generative AI is playing a bigger role is in human-like uh, applications, and not so much where, let's say, all you're dealing with is very structured numerical data,
Hmm.
right? So I feel that when you're solving a bunch of problems with more structured numerical data, it will be more assisted mode, where probably,
Right.
generative AI is giving you a bunch of methodologies to solve it. It is making it easier to solve multiple methods parallelly, and then learn and take a decision and move on. So it's more like a co-pilot in that way for problem
Right.
solving, right?
Hmm.
Whereas when it comes to cases where you have a lot of unstructured data, like images or voice and language, I think there these new technologies will kind of lead the way, where you are able to come up with more foundational and generic pre-trained models, and then the real skill is, how do you fine tune it, how do you adapt it to your use case, how do you engineer the prompts well. So a lot of focus will go into that.
Interesting. Interesting. And in terms of let's say actually going and learning these, so you would still kind of keep the roadmap very similar. So start with, let's say, Python, EDA, then maybe machine learning algorithms, or would you make any changes for this person who is, let's say, wanting to get into data science?
I think while getting in, I would say the initial two, three things will remain the same. Strong math fundamentals, or and even, statistics. That's also part of math for me. Um, Strong fundamentals in coding, more from understanding the scalability aspect. Also, coding is not just about, the
Hmm.
syntax you write or the readability of your code,
Yeah.
but thinking very algorithmically in writing performant is important, right? Because when you're dealing with a lot of big data, you can't just wait your time allowing something to run for 6 hours. So
Right.
uh, that part is important. So build the right tools and skill set for you to be able to do that, right? And generative AI is just one more tool in that, in your toolbox, in some way, right? And third thing definitely is understanding the domain, the business problem, and walking backwards from that and being able to translate it into a math problem is the key skill. I feel why you need to have a data scientist, right? Because if you
Hmm.
already have a translated math problem, you have tools to solve it. If you have a business problem without any application of ML, you have people to solve it. This bridge is what, a data scientist comes in for, to be able to translate it and match the following in terms of, this business problem needs this kind of methodology to be applied to get the most benefit. That's where your true
Hmm.
role will come in, right?
Right. So in some sense, you think that the quality of decisions and then the role which you play would kind of go a level higher, but a lot would still kind of be driven by the data scientists as opposed to, let's say, a problem being served to generative AI and it trying to solve that on its own.
I think a lot of the judgment ability comes from experience. So have a lot of hands-on experience solving the problems with data,
Hmm.
because even if a tool is doing for you, when it gives you four options, you should be able to say which option has a higher chance of working, right? Typically, what all the
Right.
libraries did, we got all ML algorithms just as import XYZ,
Yeah.
is you had a bunch of parameters and you didn't know what they were doing. And you will fit the default
Hmm.
model, and then not realizing just by, tweaking a few parameters, you can get a much better model problem. And then auto ML came in saying, I'll optimize that for you. So you will keep getting tools which will do things for you. But the judgment as to what should I use here gets built if you have the first principles and fundamentals and some experience to back it up.
Interesting, interesting. And one of the challenges. I guess to some degree, we had this luxury of going through that experience, learning by it, and then reflecting it in our, let's say, future problems. But for someone who's starting now, right? They would for them the timelines would shrink in that sense, right? That they would need to probably go through lot more number of problems, learnings to have that experience. Uh, so what could be some of the things they can do to kind of go through this journey in a shorter time frame?
I think one thing, just like how when data got bigger, we had Hadoop to do parallel processing, right?
Right.
I feel now, given how fast things are moving, every day, there is some new paper that has come out, some new version of Llama that has come out,
Mhm.
right? It is very
Yeah.
difficult to keep pace and know what to apply for what, right? But one thing I feel that
Hmm.
helps is because different people are working on different things, having a strong peer network of people focusing on different kinds of problems is the best way to get to know the information, so that if you have a problem at hand, at that point you can kind of recall and go to that, rather than trying to know
Hmm.
everything and not using it, which is as good as not having it at the back of your mind. So I think having a, even like if you're joining an organization, that has a bunch of problems being solved by different people applying different techniques, different kinds of ML approaches, though you may not be doing each one of it, you being just exposed to it, that these are the different problems people are solving, is a good enough learning for you to recall and use it when you are put in a similar situation.
So have a breadth as well as kind of depth approach. So try and learn as much from peers, which is acting like your bread, but at the same
Correct.
time have some areas. Interesting, interesting. Uh, Great. And any specific areas where you think that you feel differently as a data science professional compared to how the rest of the world thinks about generative AI? So when you talk to the people outside, what are some of the surprises where you think this is obvious, whereas the world doesn't think that way, or any trade-offs which you have seen in the way you think about generative AI and the way world thinks about generative AI?
Yeah, like I was saying, I think of generative AI as a tool, but many people think of it as replacement to people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the whole conversation about jobs going away, there my take is more like, yeah, when you got a tractor, yeah, you did not need the ox and the plow anymore, but you found something else
Right.
to utilize your time for, which was even more creative and even more productive. So I do believe, uh, in human society's resilience and ability to adapt. So so I just feel the kind of roles and kind of jobs will change, but you'll always have enough things to do. All you need to do is maybe the pace at which these are changing and the pace at which you need to upskill or change your skills to adapt to a different thing. During that intermediate phase, I think you will see those challenges. But I do believe in the resilience of human society, which might be a different thought process.
Great, great. Goda, usually towards the end, we have this rapid fire, round with our guests, and then again, the
Hmm.
idea is to just know you, better as a person. So whatever first thoughts come to your mind, to share. Would love to hear those from you. Uh, so, uh, what does a typical day look like for you?
Typical day is a school day for my daughter. So get up in the morning,
Okay.
send her to school, do your exercise, and because we have a remote working, get on to work, sit in front of the laptop, and try
Mhm.
to stand, sit throughout the day. And
Okay.
maybe once we wind up meetings, post six is family time where we watch TV,
Okay.
have a meal,
Mhm.
right? This is the typical, routine.
Okay. Right. And working in startups versus working in large structured organizations, which one do you prefer and why?
Startup is like taste of blood. Once you are in, it's tough to
You are in.
stay away from this speed.
Mhm. Okay. What does uh, ideal vacation look like for you?
I have this strange hobby where maybe that's how I'm living my dream of becoming an actress. Is I recreate, famous Bollywood movies shot in different locations when I travel. So especially
Oh,
Shah Rukh
wow.
movies. So yeah, it's on my
Okay. So
YouTube.
Europe is the place to be.
Yeah, so that's what a vacation looks like. I'll be doing multiple takes of some Bollywood song, and my daughter would be shooting, and I'll be pestering my husband to post.
Oh, wow, interesting. And any particular books which had like a huge impact on you and you would want to recommend to people?
It's not a professional side book, but on the personal side, I
Hmm.
read this book called Awakened Family. It's written by Dr.
Hmm.
Shefali. She's a psychologist.
Hmm.
So it talks about, especially when children come to this world, how they're all perfect. And as parents or unconscious parents, we try to change them, mold them, thinking, we are actually molding their life. But allowing them to be and just tuning in to where they are uh, is the best way you can bring up a child. So that did have a big impact on my
Wow.
parenting, and it has
Mhm.
really helped me. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then yeah, that almost makes me think that, generative AI in that sense is a child coming out. So,
Yeah, yeah.
how we shape this could have a huge impact. But great, great. Thanks for sharing those. Really great talking to you and learning from your experience. Thanks for sharing your learnings and your perspective.
Okay, thank you. I love the conversation. I just didn't realize how time went.
Thanks for that.